No propaganda, no lies, and definitely no BS. You're with Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk, TNT.
Oh, it's a pleasure for me. And now we're going to be speaking about someone who, I mean, he must be one of the most hated people around. However much the propaganda tried to push him, the MSM propaganda tried to push him as the savior of mankind, that only lasts for a certain amount of time. So how are we meant to actually get justice against folks like Dr. Fauci, while the entire establishment appears to be in on the fix?
Well, it's a critically important question from my perspective because there's no moving forward without contrition and without accountability. The harsh reality is that Anthony Fauci has lied from the very, very beginning of this pandemic debacle. It is disingenuous to say that he, quote, didn't know or that he was acting on the best information that he had available, because others of us knew. I certainly knew. And I didn't say the things that I said from day one because I was a really good guesser. I said them because these are the things that we've always known and what the science has shown us for decades. Things like the fact that face masks do virtually nothing to stop the spread of a respiratory virus, that social distancing is a totally made-up construct, not based in science, that asymptomatic spread is never the driver of a respiratory pandemic, that children we knew from the very beginning were at such a de minimis risk from COVID as to be fundamentally zero risk, and there was never a genuine rationale for closing down schools. And the reason these things are so important is because wearing a face mask or social distancing, those sorts of things, were not just a nuisance. They weren't just an inconvenience. They destroyed the lives and livelihoods of tens of millions of people. Social distancing, you'll recall, was the rationale for closing schools, for the fact that you were not allowed to visit your dying loved one in the hospital, that you couldn't attend a sporting event or a graduation or a funeral. The idea of social distancing limited the capacity in bars and restaurants. So small businesses operating, for example, on very thin margins, it fundamentally went bankrupt. They had to close their doors and they never opened again. The tens of thousands of small businesses that closed because of the social distancing requirements never opened. We destroyed them. And now, come June of 2024, Anthony Fauci now is willing to acknowledge that face masks did nothing, that social distancing was not based on science, that asymptomatic spread wasn't a driver of the pandemic, that natural immunity was better than vaccine-induced immunity, all of these things. I find it unconscionable, and he has got to be held to account.
Yeah, those are mean words, and they are quite correct and quite right. Now, I mean, I experienced the pandemic in loads of different ways, including watching businesses close down. In one place, I was in Chile for part of the pandemic, and there was one woman who, in this small town I was in, kept her restaurant open, didn't require masks, didn't require the special thing to get through the door, and the police came and shut her down completely. They destroyed businesses, they destroyed people's lives. And after the pandemic, when I got back to Britain, the place I lived was basically on fire. The kids who had been kept out of school were all angsty, they were all angry, they were all looking for trouble, and the community was in disarray. How, if that's my experience as someone who's, writing and investigating, how did this feel for someone like yourself who's had so much training and whose expertise? Did you feel like you were screaming at a brick wall all through the pandemic?
Absolutely. It was the greatest existential crisis of my career because my own colleagues, let's be very clear, this could not have happened without the complicity of people in my own profession, my fellow physicians who are all of a sudden doing silly things, removing every other chair in their waiting room, putting do not sit placards on things, wearing masks and demanding that their patients wear masks. This was abject silliness, but it was very, very harmful. And yes, I was egregiously censored, ridiculed, shut down, threatened from the beginning for saying everything I said about masking and social distancing, and certainly the lab origins of COVID, the virus itself. I had my medical license threatened, had to defend it on multiple occasions, which fortunately I was able to do successfully. Some of my colleagues weren't so lucky, those who are willing to actually speak out. But there was almost truly a mass psychosis that took over. People were really leading from a place of fear, and that is always a disaster. You don't make good decisions when you're in a place of fear, and that is what the people at the helm, including certainly Anthony Fauci, tried to do. They tried to manipulate people by keeping them fearful. It's a very, very powerful way to manipulate people's behavior, and that plus applying local authorities who were all too happy to have a little bit of additional power and control, the libido dominandi, the irrepressible urge for people to control the behavior of others, certainly was in full force. And I'm hopeful that now, far too late, that Anthony Fauci and a few others are admitting their lies, that people will see through it. Otherwise, we are at a huge risk when the next disaster comes along, because the next thing is coming. Likely will be disease X, bird flu, but we are going to need people to look back and see the folly that they experienced for the past 4 years, the damage that it did, and apply some critical thinking skills this time around. You cannot rely on these people who are supposedly the COVID experts, the public health experts. And I would implore people instead to listen to those measured voices, the voices of reason, who got it right the last time.
Yeah, when I was, this is a very interesting thing that you're saying here, because when I was watching the actual rollout, I was reporting on this, I was waiting for the actual rollouts to happen, and then I took a careful note of certain people who flipped their narrative to suddenly be anti-establishment, to pro-establishment and pro-vaccination just before the time, and I got a feeling that it really exposed a lot of the true nature of the people who are spreading news and spreading information to people. So I would also implore people to keep their eyes open at moments like that, which are really important, to see who is really on your side. And like you said it in a slightly different way, you know, look to the people who got it right the first time. Also look at the people who got it wrong and then flipped on it afterwards and said, oh no, right, now it's all over and now it's all done. Now, going back, what do you think the correct punishment should be for organized and targeted medical democide like what Fauci has been a part of?
Well, there's no question that if things were righteous, they would really face criminal charges. They lied. Anthony Fauci perjured himself. He knew exactly, and he lied. We have the receipts. We have the email dialogues. We have the communications back and forth where they were actively trying to suppress information, trying to avoid having things exposed by FOIA requests. We have Deborah Birx acknowledging in her book that they lied to President Trump about their intentions for the lockdown. She says it full out in her book. We knew that if we told President Trump that we actually intended to lock down for more than 2 weeks, we knew that he wouldn't go for it because he would understand what a wet blanket that would be on the economy. So you have people in positions of power who are acknowledging that they lied. We know that Anthony Fauci has perjured himself. Those are criminal offenses, and they resulted again in not only the destruction of, of our economy. It left a smoldering crater where our economy used to be, but it also was responsible for the death of millions and millions of people by what I call therapeutic nihilism. We knew from the very beginning that we had a host of readily available, safe, inexpensive, well-tolerated medications like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, steroids, things that could have very easily been used to treat people. And I did treat people, and a handful of others treated people very successfully for COVID with these safe and inexpensive medications. But again, we were ridiculed, shut down, threatened, forbidden from writing these prescriptions. We had not only hospitals that wouldn't prescribe them, but we had pharmacists who wouldn't fill legitimate prescriptions that I and other physicians tried to write. So you have these people at the helm, Anthony Fauci, Deborah Birx, Rochelle Walensky, and others who are responsible for destroying the economy, destroying people's lives, and resulting in the deaths of millions of people who did not need to die from this virus.
This is Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk, TNT.